The sky over Fort Henderson didn't burn
Is it
anymore.
stable?
It had moved
For now,
past
the
fire
interface
3
is-
days ago, settling into something
Is it
worse, a
stable?
thick ash
For now,
gray
the interface
shroud
is
that
whole.
hung motionless in the superheated air. The kind of sky that made you forget what blue looked like. Seraphine Thorne stood at the observation viewport of her recon vessel, watching the ruins scroll beneath her like a monument to humanity's preferred method of problem solving. From orbit, Fort Henderson looked like a child's drawing of hell. Black smears where neighborhoods used to breathe, glassy craters where the Iron Shard's artillery had kissed the ground, with temperatures that turned sand into mirrors. 500,000 souls. The data scrolled across her neural interface in clean, sterile numbers. Terran Federation casualties, 312,000. Iron Shard ground forces, 188,000. Civilian collateral, acceptable within projected parameters. She'd seen 1,000 worlds like this. Watched species tear themselves apart over resources, ideology, the shape of their gods. For 40 decades, the Luminous Covenant had maintained perfect neutrality, not because they were pacifists, but because intervention was contamination. Let the short-lived species burn their own bridges. Let them evolve through their violence or let them choke on it. Either way, the galaxy would continue. Seraphine's fingers moved through the holographic display, pulling up her final assessment matrices. The Thorn sector, her sector, the 3 billion souls whose collective memory she carried in the neural archive woven through her lymphatic system, had been patient. They'd watched humanity's war spill into neighboring systems. They'd cataloged the chaos, the infectious disorder of a species that couldn't organize a peace treaty without someone bringing a gun. She'd been sent to gather the last data points, to determine if there was anything in humanity worth preserving, or if the Covenant should activate the silence, a systematic shutdown of every FTL lane in the sector. Quarantine them, let them starve in the dark until they learned to be quiet, or until they stopped making discord altogether. The preliminary conclusion was clear. Humanity was chaos given flesh. They built nothing that lasted. They saved nothing that mattered. The proximity alarm screamed. Seraphine's head snapped up. 3 missiles closing at Mach 7, their heat signatures blooming across her tactical display like crimson flowers. Iron Shard interceptors. No, the trajectory was wrong. These weren't blind fire sweeps. They were targeted. Locked. On her. Evasive protocol, she commanded, but her vessel's AI was already rolling, the phase matter hull rippling as it tried to shed velocity and present a smaller cross-section. One missile overshot, its warhead detonating 2 kilometers above her, close enough that the electromagnetic pulse made her tattoos flicker, the bioluminescent script that crawled across her skin dimming for half a second. The second missile she saw coming. Watched it curve through the debris field with the kind of precision that cost more than most planets' annual defense budgets. She braced against the pilot cradle as her ship twisted, but physics was a patient teacher and momentum was its favorite lesson. The missile punched through her starboard engine at 8:14 local time. The world became cacophony, not the chaotic human discord she'd spent 4 centuries observing. This was pure physics, metal screaming as molecular bonds gave up, atmosphere escaping through a breach that shouldn't exist in phase matter hulls, the high-pitched whine of a reactor that had just been asked a question it didn't know how to answer. Seraphine's ship didn't fall. It carved, a 30-degree descent that turned into 60, then 90, the ground rushing up with the inevitability of bad poetry. She had time to think exactly 3 thoughts. First, someone wanted her dead. Second, that someone knew where she'd be. Third, High Warden Lyris had called this mission essential for Thorn sector continuity, but hadn't mentioned that essentiality might include assassination. The impact came at 8:23. The crater she made was beautiful, in the way that violence is sometimes beautiful when you're not the one being destroyed. The ground didn't just give way, it fused. The kinetic energy and the residual heat from her failing reactor turning Texas dirt into a bowl of black glass that would puzzle geologists for the next 200 years. Her ship peeled open like fruit. Not an explosion, phase matter didn't explode, it just forgot how to be solid. Sections of hull liquefied and dripped away, revealing the translucent bone-like infrastructure. the flowing script of her people's language that pulsed with dying blue light. Seraphine was pinned in what used to be the navigation hub, a slab of phase matter debris, still half solid, still heavy enough to matter, had come down across her legs. It was losing structural integrity slowly, dripping like wax onto her shins, the heat making her skin bubble and weep. Pain was new. The Covenant had long ago engineered out the sharper edges of physical sensation. Pain was inefficient. Pain was chaos that distracted from the harmony. But lying there, trapped in her own ship's corpse, Seraphine discovered that pain had a voice, and it was screaming. She tried to move. Her arms responded. Covenant physiology was resilient, built for endurance across centuries. But her legs were sealed under cooling phase matter that had forgotten it was supposed to be light as mercury and strong as titanium. Now it was just weight. The ship groaned. Somewhere in the aft section, a support structure gave way with a sound like a cathedral bell breaking. Seraphine accessed her neural archive, pulling medical protocols from the collective memory of 3 billion souls. Triage procedures, emergency stabilization, acceptable loss thresholds when rescue was not coming. The Covenant didn't send recovery teams for compromised architects. They sent deletion protocols. She was alone. The realization should have triggered panic, but the Covenant had engineered that out too. Instead, she felt curiosity, a strange, detached interest in what it meant to be an individual, separated from the harmony, waiting to find out if she'd die before her neural archive degraded and took 3 billion memories with her into silence. Then she heard the footsteps, boots on glass, heavy, human weight, human gait, someone crunching through the obsidian rubble of her crater, getting closer. Seraphine's hand moved to the interface on her wrist, still functional despite the crash. She pulled up the local comm network, laughably primitive radio waves and satellite relays that the Covenant could crack in milliseconds. The figure approaching was Dr. Declan Merrick, age 41, combat medic, Terran Federation Medical Corps, 11 years of service across 6 combat zones. Current assignment, Fort Henderson Disaster Relief, Secondary Trauma Unit. Status, disgraced. 3 months ago, Merrick had disobeyed a direct retreat order at Meridian Station to evacuate 43 civilians from a habitat dome that was actively being shelled. He'd succeeded, saved every one of them. The Federation brass had rewarded his heroism by reassigning him to Fort Henderson, a graveyard posting where the only patients left were the ones too dead to complain about his service record. Seraphine watched through her ship's failing sensors as he approached the breach in her hull. He was tall, lean in the way that soldiers get when they stop eating regularly. His medical kit hung from his shoulder like an anchor he was too stubborn to drop. He stopped at the edge of the opening, his eyes adjusting to the dim blue light of her dying ship. Then he saw her. "Easy now," he muttered, his voice rough like he'd been breathing ash for days. He dropped to his knees beside her, his hands already moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd spent half his life in the red. "Let's see what we're working with here." Seraphine's tattoos brightened as her body's stress response activated. The bioluminescent script that covered her arms, her neck, her face, neural pathways made visible, carrying the archived consciousness of her sector, flared from dim blue to electric cobalt. Merrick paused, but only for a second. Then his hands were on her pulse points, wrong locations for human anatomy, but he adjusted quickly, finding the artery in her throat where the blood flowed with a rhythm slightly slower than human normal. "Pulse is thready," he said, more to himself than to her. "Respiration shallow. You've got a puncture wound here." His fingers probed her side where a jagged piece of her own ship had opened her up. The fluid leaking out wasn't red. It was clear, viscous, smelling like ozone and something floral that had no business existing in a war zone. He reached for his trauma shears. "Do you know," Seraphine said, her voice resonating with harmonics that human vocal cords couldn't produce, "that you are touching the high architect of the luminous covenant's thorn sector?" Merrick didn't stop cutting through her suit. "I know you're bleeding out, and if I don't plug this hole, you're going to be the late architect in about 4 minutes. So unless your fancy title comes with auto repair, I'd suggest you save your breath." Her silver and indigo eyes tracked him as he worked. They weren't just eyes. They were nebulae, deep space rendered in biological tissue, swirling with patterns that suggested intelligence far beyond the merely organic. "You are Declan Merrick," she said. It wasn't a question. "Your service record indicates you saved 43 civilians at Meridian Station in direct violation of command structure. You chose individual lives over tactical advantage. Your people discarded you for it." His jaw tightened, but his hand stayed steady as he applied a sterilization field to her wound. "Yeah, well, the brass has a real sense of irony. Now hold still. Your physiology is a mess. I'm guessing copper-based blood, which means this is going to sting." He pulled a flux suture from his kit. The device hummed as it began knitting her alien tissue back together. The energy field struggling to understand cells that evolved under a different sun. "You should leave me," Seraphine whispered, though even she wasn't sure why she said it. "Your people will call you a traitor for helping an alien. My people will call me compromised for allowing your touch. This benefits neither of us." Merrick looked up, met those impossible eyes. "On this planet," he just said, his voice dropping to something harder, something that had seen too many bodies and too many command decisions made by people who'd never held a dying patient. "Your titles don't mean a damn thing. Here, you're just a patient, and I don't lose patience if I can help it." The ground shook. A distant boom of orbital artillery, Federation or Shard, impossible to tell from down here, echoed through the ship's skeleton. "Time to move," Merrick said, sliding his arms under her knees and shoulders. She felt lighter than she looked, as if her bones were hollow like a bird's, engineered for grace rather than gravity. "Where?" Seraphine asked, her head lolling against his shoulder as he lifted her. "Down," he replied, already moving toward the crater's edge. "There's a bunker about 2 clicks south. Old enough that the scanners can't see it, deep enough that we'll be off everyone's targeting grid. Just keep breathing, Architect." That's an order. The journey through Fort Henderson's ruins should have been impossible. Merrick carried 130 pounds of alien biology across shattered concrete and twisted rebar, while artillery fire walked across the horizon. He moved like a man who'd made this kind of run before, quick when the sightlines were open, patient when cover was scarce, always watching the sky for the contrails that meant someone had decided this particular grid square needed to stop existing. Seraphine drifted in and out of consciousness, her neural archive cycling through trauma protocols that weren't designed for this kind of damage. In her moments of clarity, she studied the man carrying her. His face was weathered in the way human faces get when they've made too many decisions that cost other people their lives. Lines around his eyes from squinting at wounds in bad light. A scar on his jaw that looked like it came from shrapnel, poorly treated. He hadn't shaved in 3 days, and his hair, dark, shot through with gray at the temples, was matted with dust. He looked like every human soldier she'd ever cataloged. Tired, bitter. One more bad shift away from giving up entirely. But he hadn't left her. That was the part her archive couldn't process. By every tactical calculation, abandoning her was the logical choice. She represented an unknown variable, a potential contamination, a waste of resources in a disaster zone where resources meant the difference between living and dying. Yet here he was, his breathing labored, his shoulders screaming from the weight, carrying her towards shelter because some part of him, some stubborn, illogical part, couldn't walk away from someone who needed help. The bunker was a relic from before the Terran Federation existed, pre-collapse era, when Earth's nations still thought nuclear war was their biggest problem. It was buried deep in the bedrock, lined with lead shielding that had stopped being useful about 2 centuries ago. The entrance was hidden under the collapsed remains of what might have been a school or a hospital. Hard to tell when buildings had been reduced to their component atoms. Merrick knew exactly where it was. He'd been using it as a secondary cache for medical supplies, back when he still had patients to treat. Now it was just a hole in the ground that radiation scanners couldn't penetrate and thermal mapping couldn't resolve. Perfect. He carried Seraphine down 3 flights of stairs that were more rust than metal, through a corridor that smelled of stagnant water and centuries of decay. The main chamber was small, maybe 15 feet square, with a single cot in the corner, a broken water recycler against one wall, and crates of supplies that Merrick had stockpiled when he still believed this posting might last longer than the Federation's patience with keeping him alive. He lowered her onto the cot carefully, like she might break, which, given the state of her injuries, wasn't far from the truth. Five-star accommodations, he muttered, setting his medical kit on a rusted crate. Valet's off today, and room service is mostly expired nutrient bars. Seraphine's eyes tracked him as he snapped on a fresh pair of gloves. The blue script on her skin was still flickering, still struggling to maintain the connection to her neural archive through the trauma. Now that he had better light, a single LED panel he'd rigged to the bunker's backup power, he could see the patterns more clearly. They weren't tattoos, they were living circuitry, bioluminescent pathways that pulsed in rhythm with her breathing. Your technology, she said, her voice stronger now, is to mine as a sharpened stone is to a particle beam. You cannot heal what you do not understand. I understand trauma, Merrick shot back, pulling out a portable scanner. The device chirped in protest as it tried to make sense of her multi-layered DNA. I understand that a lung, or whatever you use to process oxygen, needs to be clear of fluid. I understand that infection kills a queen just as fast as it kills a grunt. Now hold still while I figure out if human antibiotics are going to save you or poison you. The scan results made no sense. Her cellular structure looked like someone had taken human DNA and rewritten it in a language that used twice as many letters. Redundant systems, backup pathways, entire organ clusters that seemed to serve no purpose except to keep her alive when any reasonable biology would have given up. 64% compatibility, Seraphine said, reading the scanner's output through some method Merrick didn't want to think about. Your anesthetic will work, but the side effects will be inconvenient. My neural link will fluctuate. I may speak truths not meant for your ears. I've heard plenty of deathbed confessions, Merrick replied, prepping an injector with a broad-spectrum analgesic. None of them have shocked me yet. He pressed the injector against her neck. She didn't flinch, but her pupils blossomed, those silver and indigo nebulae spinning in frantic patterns like galaxies colliding. After a moment, the rigid tension in her spine melted. The imperial mask, the cold, calculating expression she'd worn even while bleeding, softened into something almost human. Tell me, she said, her voice now airy, detached, floating somewhere between consciousness and dreams. Why stay? The evacuation transports left 2 hours ago. You knew the bombardment was coming. You could have been safe. Merrick sat on a stool across from her, pulling out a nutrient bar and tearing the wrapper with his teeth. It tasted like compressed cardboard seasoned with regret. I have a problem with authority, he said, and an even bigger problem with leaving people behind. Even an enemy? Are you an enemy? Seraphine was quiet for a long moment. Above them, the ground shuddered. Another direct hit somewhere on the surface, miles away but close enough to rattle the medical supplies on his crates. The luminous covenant has maintained neutrality for 40 decades, she said, the words flowing out like a rehearsed prayer. We do not interfere in the squabbles of shorter-lived species. We observe. We calculate. We wait for the chaos to burn itself out. 40 decades of watching people kill each other, Merrick said, his voice turning cold. That's a long time to stand on the sidelines while the galaxy bleeds. Must be nice having that kind of view. Seraphine turned her head to look at him. The analgesic was working. The sharp edge of her imperial training was slipping, revealing something raw underneath. It was consensus, she whispered. We believed that to intervene was to contaminate your natural evolution. If we saved you from yourselves, you would never learn to grow. Well, look around. Merrick gestured at the damp concrete walls, the rust, the darkness pressing in from all sides. We're all grown up now. We've learned how to build brains that crack planets. We've learned how to turn entire systems into graveyards. How's that for evolution? The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bone. The second day in the bunker passed in a haze of medical monitoring and careful rationing. Merrick checked Seraphine's vitals every 4 hours, adjusted her fluid intake, watched the flux suture slowly knit her alien tissue back into something approximating wholeness. She slept mostly, or at least she entered a state that looked like sleep, her eyes closed, her breathing steady, the blue script on her skin dimming to a soft glow like dying embers. Merrick used the time to catalog his supplies. 3 doses of sedative left, 2 packets of sterilization gel, a handful of bandages that were more lint than gauze. His flux suture was blinking a low battery warning, a steady amber light that felt like a ticking clock. He'd kept worse patients alive with less. But those patients had been human. He knew human biology, knew which organs could take damage and which failures were terminal. Seraphine was a mystery wrapped in elegant alien physiology, and every time he thought he understood how her body worked, she'd do something that rewrote the rules, like heal. By the third day, the burns he'd treated were almost gone. Not scarred over, gone. Replaced by skin that looked even more translucent than before, as if her cells were reorganizing themselves into something denser, more efficient. The bioluminescent script was changing too, the patterns shifting in ways that suggested her body was adapting to the bunker's atmosphere, the radiation, maybe even the way Merrick's human hands had touched her. Your cellular regeneration that he said on the afternoon of day 3 running another scan isn't healing, it's evolving. I've seen bio-augmented soldiers, vat-grown tissue, nothing like this. Seraphine sat up slowly. The movement was graceful in a way that made his own joints ache in sympathy. She looked at the bandage on her abdomen, the puncture wound that should have taken weeks to close, and peeled it away. The skin beneath was flawless, marked only by a faint iridescent sheen. Our physiology is not static, Declan, she said, using his first name for the first time. We are the architects of our own forms. Within the luminous covenant, we are connected by harmonic consciousness. Our bodies reflect the collective need of the sector we represent. Merrick set down the scanner. You're telling me you have a hive mind, not a hive, a harmony. We are individuals, but we are not alone. We carry each other's memories, share each other's wisdom. When one of us dies, their knowledge remains in the archive. She touched her chest, right over where a human heart would be. I carry 3 billion souls, Declan, their histories, their neural signatures, their accumulated understanding of 4 centuries. He sat back on his heels, the scope of what she was saying hitting him like a physical weight. So, if you die, 3 billion people lose their connection to the covenant. They become echoes, unsynchronized. It is a fate we consider worse than biological cessation. Jesus, Merrick breathed. He'd spent his entire career trying to save individuals. One soldier, one civilian, one patient at a time. The idea of a single person carrying the collective memory of billions made the room feel too small, the air too thin. So when you said you came here to decide if humanity was worth saving, he said slowly, you weren't talking about filing a report. No. Seraphine's eyes met his, and he saw guilt there. Real human guilt. I came to gather the final data points, to see if there was anything in your species compatible with harmony. If not, Nema, she paused. We were going to activate the silence, a systemic shutdown of all FTL lanes in this sector. It would isolate you, cut you off from the rest of the galaxy. You would starve or kill each other off without ever knowing we were the ones who closed the door. Merrick felt something cold settle in his chest. Pruning, that's what you called it. Yes. That's a real nice way to say you were sentencing billions of people to slow death in the dark. It is necessity, Seraphine said, but for the first time he heard doubt in her voice. The analgesic was still in her system, making her truthful. The galaxy is vast. The imperfection of species like yours is infectious. The Iron Shard, they are a cancer. The Terran Federation, you are the fever that reacts to it. Both of you are consumed by the struggle. You do not build. You only survive. Merrick stood up, his face only inches from hers now. He could smell the ozone on her skin, feel the faint vibration of whatever powered her neural archive. You're wrong, he said quietly. We don't just survive. We hope. We bleed for people we don't know. We stay in bunkers with dying queens because it's the right thing to do, not because some collective consciousness told us it was efficient. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small, dented metal tag he'd been carrying since Meridian Station. It was an ID sick for a child, 8 years old, no family name listed, just a single word etched into the aluminum. Rowan. He pressed it into Seraphine's hand. Look at this, he said. This isn't a data point. This isn't an echo. This was a girl named Rowan. She liked to draw horses. She had a stuffed animal she called Mr. Buttons. She didn't have a neural link or a harmonic signature or 3 billion souls backing her up. She just had a life. And she lost it because the imperfection you're so worried about was more important to the people in charge than her breathing. Seraphine's fingers closed over the disc. Her tattoos flickered, not blue but jagged electric yellow, the color of distress, of cognitive dissonance. She closed her eyes, and he saw a single tear roll down her cheek. Not water, something silver and thick, like liquid mercury with weight. The bunker grew heavy with silence. Then Seraphine spoke, her voice so quiet he had to lean in to hear. "I have been suppressing it," she whispered. "The archive, the part of Thorn sector memory that recorded our last pruning." Pruning of what? A species called the Valerians. They were poets, Declan. They sang in frequencies that could make stars weep. They were messy and loud and brilliant, and we silenced them because their resonance was too beautiful. It made the Covenant feel inadequate. She opened her eyes, and the tears were flowing freely now, silvery tracks down her alabaster cheeks. "I was the one who signed the order. I told myself it was for the harmony. But holding this," she looked at the child's tag in her palm, "looking at you, I realized I was just afraid. Afraid of disorder. Afraid that if we let beauty exist outside our control, it would prove we were never as perfect as we believed." Merrick didn't know what to say. He'd spent 11 years hating the Federation brass for their cold calculations, their acceptable losses, their ability to turn human lives into numbers on a spreadsheet. He'd never imagined that a being who ruled the stars could feel the same crushing guilt. He sat beside her on the cot, not touching, just present. Two people in an ancient tomb, carrying the weight of those they'd failed to save. "Whatever happens next, Seraphine," he said, his voice softening for the first time in days, "you're not that person anymore. You're just a patient, and you're doing fine." She looked at him, and for a moment, the High Architect was gone. There was only a woman, terrified, alone, 400 years old, and just now learning what it meant to be responsible for a single choice instead of following the consensus of billions. She reached out, her hand finding his. Her skin was warm, real. "Thank you," she whispered. They didn't speak for the rest of the night. They didn't have to. Above them, the war continued. Orbital strikes painting the sky with temporary new suns. The Federation and the Shard locked in their endless dance of mutual destruction. But in the bunker, in the silence they'd built between them, Seraphine and Declan had found something the Covenant's 40 decades of observation had missed. Not harmony, not consensus. Just two broken things, trying to figure out if there was a way to be whole. The fourth day began with sound. Not the familiar drip of condensation or the groan of stressed concrete. This was rhythmic, purposeful, a low-frequency vibration that traveled through the bedrock and made the water in Merrick's recycler ripple in perfect concentric circles. He knew that sound. Sonic resonance scanners, the kind the Federation used to map underground structures when they were looking for survivors. Or when they were hunting someone they decided was better off dead. Merrick was on his feet instantly, his hand dropping to the heavy pistol holstered at his back. He hadn't touched the weapon since the crash, but muscle memory was sharp and cold. "Declan?" Seraphine asked, her eyes tracking to the ceiling. "The cavalry," he said, though there was no relief in his voice. "But they're not here to rescue us." He moved to the bunker's entrance, the heavy steel hatch that had been welded shut from the inside decades ago. He pressed his ear against the metal. The vibration was getting stronger. They were using ground-penetrating radar, narrowing the search grid. They knew someone was down here. "How do you know they mean us harm?" Seraphine asked, rising from the cot. Her movements were fluid now, her strength almost fully returned. "Because the Federation doesn't send cleaners for a rescue mission," Merrick said, checking the charge on his pistol. 15 shots. "They send them to make sure no one's left to tell the wrong story. They know I'm with you. They know you're a High Architect. If you die here, and they can blame it on the Shard, they get exactly what they want. The Covenant joining the war on their side." Seraphine's tattoos flared crimson. "They would sacrifice their own for tactical advantage?" "In their eyes, I'm already dead," Merrick said. "Disgraced medic sent to a high-casualty zone. My existence is a rounding error. You, on the other hand, you're the ultimate bargaining chip." A muffled explosion rocked the bunker. Dust cascaded from the ceiling. They were through the first layer of the old medical station above. maybe 5 minutes before they reached the hatch. Merrick turned to Seraphine. Can you fight? I am an architect, she said. I design worlds. I do not destroy them. Well, today you might have to do a little remodeling. He pulled two cylindrical devices from his kit, ion flares designed to scramble electronic systems and overload optical sensors. They wouldn't kill, but they'd buy seconds. Maybe enough. When the hatch blows, he said, positioning himself behind a stone pillar, I need you behind cover. Don't move until I... Declan, her hand caught his arm. You cannot hold off a Federation cleaner squad alone. They are your people. They stopped being my people when they decided kids at Meridian were acceptable losses, he said. Then quieter, I'm not doing this for the Federation. I'm doing this for my patient. The hatch groaned. A thermal cutting torch began eating through the seam, spitting white-hot sparks into the darkness. Seraphine looked at him, this human who'd spent 4 days keeping her alive, who'd given her a dead child's ID tag and asked her to see it as a person instead of a data point. This man who was about to die defending her from his own species because he'd decided, somewhere in the last 96 hours, that she mattered more than his survival. There is another way, she said. If I connect to their tactical network, if I project harmonic resonance, I might be able to disable them without violence. No, Merrick said, his voice sharp. Your signature is too unique. You'd be a beacon for every shard and Federation ship in the sector. You'd be giving them our exact coordinates. The first section of the hatch fell inward with a deafening clang. White light, thunderous sound. A flashbang grenade bounced across the floor. Merrick was ready. Eyes closed, mouth open to equalize pressure. The detonation was a physical force, but he'd lived through worse. As the white faded, he saw 3 figures in matte black tactical gear stepping through the breach. They moved with the synchronized precision of apex predators. Professional, efficient, lethal. Drop the weapon, Merrick. The voice boomed through external speakers. Major Vance Hollis, the man who'd signed Merrick's disgrace papers. You're out of your depth, son. Hand over the asset, and maybe we can fix your record. Maybe you get a trial instead of a body bag. Asset, not person, not high architect, just a thing to be traded. Merrick didn't answer with words. He tossed the ion flare. The bunker erupted in blinding azure light. The soldiers' visors, designed to filter standard spectrums, were overwhelmed. They stumbled, weapons firing blindly, high-velocity rounds chewing through Merrick's makeshift barricade. He moved. 2 shots. 2 hits. Not kills. He aimed for joints in the armor, the vulnerable points where kinetic shields couldn't fully protect. Both soldiers went down screaming. Merrick, you idiot! Hollis roared over the comm. You're throwing your life away for an alien! She has a name, Merrick shouted back, firing again. And she's worth 10 of you. A round caught him in the shoulder. The impact spun him around, and he slumped against stone, his vision blurring. He'd been hit. The wound was bad. He could feel the heat, the wet spread of blood soaking through his jacket. He tried to raise his pistol, but his arm felt like lead. Boots on concrete. Hollis was coming. This was it, end of the line for the disgraced medic who couldn't follow orders. Then the air changed. It didn't just feel different, it tasted different. Sweet, like rain on superheated stone. And it hummed, a frequency that made the very atmosphere shimmer. Seraphine stepped out from behind the pillar. She wasn't the wounded woman he'd been treating. She was radiant. The blue script on her skin burned with blinding light. Her hair floated in gravity that didn't exist for anyone else. Her eyes, those impossible nebulae, had expanded, filling her entire orbital sockets with swirling cosmic fire. Stop, she said. The word wasn't loud, but it had the weight of continents. Hollis froze. His weapon was aimed at her heart, but his finger wouldn't move. The other soldiers, struggling to rise, fell back as if pressed by an invisible hand. You are discordant, Seraphine said, walking toward Hollis. Her voice was no longer singular. It was a chorus, 1,000 voices speaking in perfect unison. You seek to organize death. You seek to build peace on the silence of others. Hollis's face twisted in terror and rage. What are you doing to me? I am showing you the truth. Merrick watched, mesmerized, as a ripple of light traveled from Seraphine to the Major. Hollis didn't scream. He simply gasped, his eyes rolling back as 3 billion souls worth of archived memory flooded his consciousness. He saw Meridian Station, saw the 43 civilians Merrick had saved, saw the 8-year-old girl named Rowan, her last moments before the shard railgun turned her habitat into vapor, saw every order Hollis had given that traded human lives for strategic advantage. He saw himself, truly saw himself, and couldn't bear the weight. The Major collapsed. The other soldiers followed, their neural links overwhelmed by the sheer bandwidth of Seraphine's consciousness. They didn't die. They just stopped, bodies slumping to the floor, minds trying desperately to process emotions they'd spent years burying under duty and following orders. The light dimmed. The hum faded. Seraphine swayed, her knees buckling. The energy drain was catastrophic, her tattoos flickering from brilliant blue to sickly gray. Merrick scrambled over, ignoring the fire in his shoulder. He caught her before she hit the ground. Seraphine, Seraphine, stay with me. Her eyes were dull now, the nebulae barely visible. I had to. They were going to kill you. You sacrificed your recovery, he said, cradling her. You just set yourself back days, maybe weeks. You saved the only thing that made sense in this sector, she whispered. I could not let them take that away. Above them, the ground shook. Not from artillery this time, from something much larger. A spatial distortion, the signature of a Covenant vessel folding space to arrive at precise coordinates. They detected the broadcast. Every ship in the system had probably detected it. Seraphine looked up at Merrick, and despite her exhaustion, despite the cost, she smiled. We are about to have company, she said. The last thing Merrick saw before the world dissolved into white light was her hand, still clutching Rowan's ID tag. Then the bunker was gone, and they were somewhere else entirely. The transition wasn't movement. It was erasure and reconstruction. The bunker dissolving atom by atom, while somewhere else, 15,000 kilometers above Fort Henderson, those same atoms remembered how to be solid. Declan Merrick's boots hit a surface that felt like frozen water, smooth, translucent, warm despite looking like ice. The air tasted wrong, too clean, scrubbed of every particle that made breathing feel real. It made his lungs ache like he'd surfaced too fast from deep water. He blinked against glare that had no source. The walls were white, flowing with the same bone-like translucence as Seraphine's crashed ship, covered in script that pulsed with soft amber light. Not a room, a cathedral. Vaulted ceilings that stretched up into infinity, or at least far enough that his eyes couldn't find the top. Declan! Seraphine's voice cut through his disorientation. She was standing a few meters away, no longer slumped against him. The teleportation had given her a moment to gather herself, to rebuild the Imperial mask. But her eyes betrayed her. They were afraid. Around them, figures materialized from the walls themselves. Not walking, not appearing, just becoming solid where there had been empty air. 7 of them, tall, clad in armor that didn't have seams or joints. It flowed over their bodies like liquid mercury frozen mid-pore, reflecting the room back in distorted curves. Their helmets were smooth obsidian plates, featureless except for the way they caught light and bent it into something unsettling. High Wardens, the Covenant's enforcers. Secure the architect, a voice commanded. Not spoken, broadcast. A wave of thought that hit Merrick's mind like a physical blow, making his vision swim and his knees buckle. One of the wardens moved toward him. The air around the figure thickened, pressing down with the weight of an ocean. Wait! Seraphine stepped between them, her arms spread wide. The blue script on her skin pulsed violet, protective, defiant. He stays with me. He is the reason the Thorn sector still has a voice. The warden paused. The pressure lightened just enough for Merrick to breathe. Then the circle of armored figures parted. She didn't walk. She glided, her presence pushing the other wardens back like gravity itself was deferring to her authority. High Warden Lyris. Her armor was gold instead of obsidian, etched with patterns that hurt to look at directly, as if the engravings existed in more dimensions than human eyes could process. Her helmet retracted, flowing back into her collar like living metal. The face beneath was Covenant, the same elegant, swept-back ears as Seraphine, the same impossible bone structure. But where Seraphine's eyes were swirling nebulae of indigo and silver, Lyris's were flat mirror chrome, cold, reflective, empty. Architect Thorn, Lyris said, her voice a blade of ice wrapped in silk. You have been synchronized with imperfection. You are leaking. Your resonance is fractured. He saved my life, Lyris, Seraphine replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her tattoos. He treated wounds that our own medical protocols have forgotten how to address. He chose me when his own kind chose to kill us both. Lyris turned her mirror gaze to Merrick. He felt it like being dissected by lasers. Every mistake, every patient lost at Meridian, every bitter word he'd ever spit at a superior officer being pulled to the surface and examined. A field medic, Lyris observed, the thought broadcast dripping with contempt. Disgraced, a scrap of biology from a dying system. You believe this creature has something to offer the Luminous Covenant? Merrick managed to look up, his jaw set despite the pain radiating from his shoulder wound. I'm not a creature, Warden. I'm a doctor. And if you're looking for someone to kiss your shiny boots, you've got the wrong guy. I've dealt with brass like you on 6 planets. You all talk about higher purpose while someone else does the bleeding. The silence that followed was absolute. Merrick could feel the shock rippling through the chamber, a wave of cognitive dissonance from the other wardens. No one spoke to Lyris that way, not in the Covenant, not anywhere. Insolence, Lyris whispered, and the pressure returned tenfold. It felt like his skull was being crushed in a vice, his ribs compressing until he couldn't draw breath. Stop it, Seraphine screamed, and violet light flared so bright that even Lyris stepped back. If you kill him, I will sever the link. I will dump the Thorn Archive into the void and leave the Covenant hollow. Try me, Warden. The pressure vanished. Merrick slumped forward, gasping, his face inches from the cool white floor. Lyris's eyes narrowed. You would commit neural suicide for a soft target? A single-cycle organism? He is not a target, Seraphine said, her voice dropping to something dangerous. He is a man, and he is under my protection. Treat his wounds now or explain to the High Council why the architect of 43% of the galaxy's relays is no longer speaking. Lyris stared at Seraphine for a long moment. The air hummed with tension, 2 gods deciding whether to go to war. Finally, the warden gave a stiff nod. Take him to secondary reclamation, she commanded the soldiers. Stabilize the biology, but do not let it touch anything. He is contagion. The wardens moved in, their hands cold and hard as they hauled Merrick up. He looked at Seraphine as they dragged him toward a shimmering doorway. She looked back, and for one fleeting second, the Imperial mask was gone. He saw fear, saw the cost of what she'd just done, threatened the very harmony she'd been built to protect. For him. Hang in there, architect, Merrick said, trying to find the old sarcasm to mask his terror. I'll be in the gift shop if you need me. She didn't smile. She just watched him disappear through the door, her hands clenched at her sides. The reclamation bay was clinical perfection rendered as nightmare. No cabinets, no instruments, no familiar smells of antiseptic. Just floating platforms and light that seemed to perform surgery on its own, peeling back layers of reality to examine what lay beneath. They dropped Merrick onto a platform that molded itself to his spine instantly. He felt pinpricks along his neck and arms, diagnostic probes or sedatives, impossible to tell. What are you pumping into me? He barked at the tall figure who appeared beside him. No eyes, just a smooth band of silver where a brow should be. Stabilizer, the figure replied, thought voice flat and emotionless. Your cellular structure is collapsing due to localized kinetic trauma and primitive infectious agents. We are purging the imperfection. Purge away, Merrick muttered, feeling cold numbness spread from his shoulder. Just leave the personality intact. It's the only thing I've got left. The figure didn't respond. It manipulated ribbons of light that danced over Merrick's wound, and he watched, horrified and fascinated, as his torn flesh began knitting itself back together. Not the messy, painful process of human healing. Silent, graceful, wrong. The bullet was extracted by magnetic fields he couldn't see, dropping into a receptacle with a tiny metallic clink. As the anesthetic took hold, Merrick's mind wandered. He thought about the bunker, about Rowan's ID tag in Seraphine's hand, about the moment she'd looked at that piece of metal and seen a person instead of a statistic. She'd learned the lesson, the hardest lesson, that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but acting when the cost was everything. But now she was in a place where that lesson was heresy. The Covenant didn't want individuals. They didn't want messy emotions or personal attachments. They wanted the music to play forever, perfect and unchanging, and Merrick was the ultimate wrong note. He drifted into sleep that felt like drowning in mercury. His last conscious thought, a prayer to gods he didn't believe in, don't let them break her. When Merrick woke, the wound in his shoulder was gone. Not scarred, erased. The skin was smooth, pale, almost luminescent. It didn't feel like his. He sat up slowly. The platform tilted to accommodate him, and he swung his legs over the side, testing his weight. A bit lightheaded, but otherwise intact. The room was empty except for a single figure at the far end, silhouetted against a viewport that showed swirling nebula clouds he didn't recognize. "You are awake," Seraphine said without turning. Merrick walked toward her, his bare feet silent on the floor. "Your medical team is efficient. Bedside manner could use work, though." She turned. She was wearing robes now. Not the shredded suit from the crash, but flowing garments that shifted between gold and silver depending on the light. Her hair was bound in an intricate lattice of phase matter, and she looked every inch the High Architect. But her eyes were tired. "Lyris wants you gone," she said quietly. "She has drafted a petition to the High Council. They believe your presence is a threat to the neural stability of the Thorn sector." "I expected that," Merrick replied. "So what's the plan? You going to drop me at the nearest Federation outpost? Give me a nice goodbye and a bag of nutrient bars?" "I cannot send you back to the Federation," Seraphine said, and there was genuine anguish in her voice. "They have declared you a traitor. Major Hollis's report reached command before we extracted you. If you return, you will be executed within the hour." "Figured as much. Hollis isn't the type to forgive a shot to the leg." Seraphine moved closer, her robes whispering against the floor. "You are more than a man without a country, Declan. You are a witness. You have seen what I truly am. Not the architect, but the woman beneath. And I cannot let them erase that." She stopped a few feet away. Her tattoos were glowing soft blue, but there was a jagged edge to the light he hadn't seen before. Instability, fracture lines in the perfect harmony. "I spent the last 6 hours connected to the network," she whispered. "I tried to explain what happened in the bunker. I tried to share the memory of Rowan's tag, of your hands refusing to let me die. And they," her voice broke, "they saw it as malfunction, a glitch in my data stream. They wanted to archive it, compress it, smooth out the rough edges. They don't want to know that neutrality has a face," Merrick said. "They don't want to admit the war they've been watching is made of real people." "They are afraid," Seraphine agreed, "just as I was afraid. They have spent so long being perfect that they no longer know how to handle anything less." She reached out and took his hand. Her skin was cold, but he felt warmth beneath. The faint electrical hum of her neural archive. 3 billion souls cycling through her consciousness. "They are going to silence me, Declan." He felt ice settle in his chest. "What do you mean?" "Not with a weapon, with the harmony." Her fingers tightened on his. "At midnight, 4 hours from now, they will perform a neural reset. They will rewrite my architecture. Erase the last 5 days. I will forget the bunker. I will forget Rowan. I will forget your name." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. "They're going to turn you back into a machine," Merrick said slowly. "They are going to make me the High Architect again. A being who calculates acceptable losses and signs extinction orders without feeling the weight." She looked up at him, and he saw crystalline drops forming in her eyes. Not the silver tears from before, but something clearer, more fragile. "I do not want to forget you, Declan. I do not want to return to that cold silence." Merrick pulled his hand free and turned away, his mind racing. 4 hours. 4 hours to figure out how to stop an alien procedure he didn't understand, performed by beings who could manipulate space-time and rewrite consciousness like editing a text file. He'd faced impossible odds before. At Meridian, when the evacuation window was closing and 43 civilians were still trapped. He'd found a way then, ignored the orders, trusted his instincts, saved every single one. "Not if I have anything to say about it," he said, turning back to her. "Declan, what can one human medic do against the luminous covenant?" He gave her a grim smile. "I don't know yet, but I've spent 11 years patching up people everyone else gave up on. I'm not about to stop now, even if the patient is a queen who rules half the galaxy. Seraphine stared at him, and he saw something kindle in her eyes. Not the cold calculation of an architect, the stubborn, desperate fire of a person who refused to be erased. Then we must move fast, she said. Lyris will come for us at midnight. We have 3 hours to find a way to make the entire galaxy listen. Merrick checked his clothes. They'd been cleaned, repaired, returned to him. His medical kit sat on a nearby shelf, lighter than before but still functional. And his pistol, surprisingly, was there too. 15 shots, same as always. First question, he said, holstering the weapon. Where do they perform this reset? The Chamber of Resonance. It is the neural processing hub for all of Thorn's sector. 3 billion consciousnesses flow through that space, synchronized and harmonized. Can you access it? I am an architect. The chamber is mine to enter. She paused. But Declan, if I go there and they discover my intent, then we don't let them discover it until it's too late. He moved to the viewport, looking out at the vast flagship, kilometers of phase matter and flowing light, a vessel that made human dreadnoughts look like children's toys. You said your people respond to consensus, right? They make decisions collectively? Yes. Then we don't fight the consensus. We change it. He turned to face her. You're going to broadcast something into that chamber. Not just your memories, everyone's. The raw, unfiltered truth of what's happening down there on Fort Henderson. The Meridian massacres, the Shard atrocities, the Federation's body counts, all of it. Seraphine's eyes widened. If I flood the network with that much unprocessed data, it will destabilize the entire sector. 3 billion souls will experience trauma simultaneously. Good, Merrick said. Let them feel it. Let them know what their perfect neutrality actually costs. He stepped closer. You told me the Covenant silenced the Valyrians because their beauty was threatening. You've been living in fear for 400 years. Fear of imperfection, fear of feeling, fear of being wrong. It's time your people learn that being broken is the first step to being real. They could reject it, Seraphine whispered. They could purge me as corrupted, execute the reset immediately. Or they could wake up. Merrick met her impossible eyes. You're the one who taught me that sometimes you have to speak truth even when everyone wants silence. Time to take your own medicine, architect. For a long moment, she just looked at him. Then slowly she nodded. I will need your help, she said. The chamber is guarded. Lyris will have wardens stationed at every access point. Leave them to me, Merrick said, checking his pistol's charge. I'm getting real tired of people in fancy armor telling me what I can't do. They moved through the flagship's corridors like ghosts, Seraphine using her neural link to mask their signatures, creating blind spots in the ship's internal sensors. It was like walking through a dream where you were the only one who knew you were awake. They passed high wardens who didn't even turn their heads, their obsidian visors reflecting nothing. Past floating maintenance drones that hummed past without registering their presence. Merrick's hand rested on his pistol grip. The weight was familiar, grounding, real. 200 meters, Seraphine whispered, her voice directly in his mind now. She taught him how to receive thought speech without the crushing pressure. The primary conduit is ahead. They rounded a corner and Merrick saw it. The entrance to the Chamber of Resonance was a massive circular aperture, an iris made of flowing metal that looked like the eye of some cosmic god. It was guarded by 2 high wardens in gold armor, their phase matter plates shimmering with defensive fields. I cannot mask us here, Seraphine said aloud. The resonance is too strong. They will detect us the moment we step into their line of sight. Then we don't step, Merrick replied. We sprint. He pulled an ion flare from his belt, his last one. The device felt light in his hand, almost laughably inadequate against beings who could fold space and rewrite matter. But it was human, and humans had gotten very good at making things that disrupted order. When the light goes blue, he said, run for the interface. Don't look back. Declan, trust me. He didn't wait for her agreement. He stepped out into the corridor, his boots loud on the white floor, drawing the warden's attention instantly. Halt! The thought voice boomed. The human is out of quarantine, neutralized with extreme prejudice. Merrick tossed the flare. Blue light erupted, jagged, violent, chaotic. the kind of electromagnetic pulse that human engineers had designed specifically to overwhelm sophisticated sensor arrays. The warden staggered, their visual feeds scrambled by input they'd never been programmed to filter. Merrick followed the flare with 2 quick shots. His first missed, scorching the wall. His second hit the narrow gap between helmet and chest plate, the one vulnerability in phase matter armor. The gold rippled, struggling to absorb kinetic energy it wasn't designed for. The warden went down on one knee, his hand clutching his throat. "Go!" Merrick yelled. Seraphine blurred past him, a streak of violet and silver heading for the iris. The second warden, recovered from the flare, raised his hand. The air rippled with gravity manipulation, a wave of force heading straight for Seraphine's back. Merrick threw himself into its path. The impact felt like being hit by a freight train made of solid physics. His ribs cracked. He heard them break with sounds like dry branches snapping. The breath was driven from his lungs in a single agonizing gasp, and he was thrown against the wall hard enough to see stars. He slumped to the floor, his pistol clattering away. Through the haze of pain, he saw the warden looming over him, saw the golden hand beginning to glow with deletion energy, the same weapon Lyris had nearly used in the bunker. This was it, end of the line. But then the warden stopped. His head tilted as if listening to something Merrick couldn't hear. In the center of the chamber, Seraphine had reached the interface. She was floating in a vortex of data ribbons, thousands of streams of pure information swirling around her like a tornado made of light. Her hair flowed out behind her, and her skin had gone from pale alabaster to blinding white. She wasn't just accessing the network. She was becoming it. Merrick felt it even through his broken ribs and oxygen-starved brain. A sound that bypassed his ears and spoke directly to his neurons. The chamber filled with the sound of the bunker, dripping water, ragged breathing, the metallic clink of Rowan's ID tag hitting concrete. Then Fort Henderson. The screams, the ash, the sound of orbital artillery turning a city into a crematorium. Then Meridian, the 43 civilians he'd saved, their voices overlapping, thanking him, crying, begging to live just one more day. The warden above Merrick staggered. The deletion energy in his palm flickered and died. He turned away, his entire body trembling, fixed on Seraphine. She was screaming, not with her voice, with her soul. 3 billion souls channeled through a single body, forcing the Covenant to hear what 4 decades of neutrality had cost. The flagship itself groaned. The white walls flickered crimson. The harmony was being breached, and the imperfection was flooding in like a dam breaking. Merrick managed to crawl toward his pistol, his fingers closing on the grip, but he didn't fire, because he saw what was happening. The wardens weren't attacking, they were listening, and listening was the first step to understanding. The iris at the far end of the chamber exploded inward, not from external force, but from internal pressure. The data vortex was too much, the neural network overloading. High Warden Lyris stepped through the smoke, her gold armor wreathed in dark energy that looked like anti-light, like the opposite of existence. Enough. Her thought voice was a thunderclap that shattered data streams. You are a traitor to the harmony, Thorn. You have brought the plague of individuality into the heart of the luminous covenant. Lyris raised both hands. Between them a spear of black light formed, pure deletion energy designed to erase a neural signature from reality itself. She aimed it at Seraphine's chest. I arranged this, Lyris said, her voice cold with certainty. Hired rogue elements, mercenaries flying shard signature missiles, to eliminate you before you could question the consensus. You were wavering, Architect. The Council decided, better a martyred hero than a questioning voice. The revelation hit Merrick like a physical blow. Lyris had tried to kill Seraphine. The crash wasn't an accident. It was an assassination. Merrick didn't think, couldn't stand, couldn't breathe properly, but his hands still worked. He fired from the floor. The shot hit Lyris's shoulder. The slug flattened against her kinetic shield, but it was enough to throw off her aim. The deletion spear missed Seraphine by inches, striking the interface behind her. The chamber erupted in sparks and cascading light. The data vortex collapsed, ribbons falling like dead snakes. Seraphine fell from the air, her body limp, her light extinguished. Merrick scrambled over to her, ignoring the grinding protest of his damaged body. He caught her before she hit the floor. their momentum sliding them across the polished surface. Seraphine, Seraphine, talk to me. Her eyes were open, but the nebulae were gone. Just dark, almost human pupils clouded with exhaustion. Declan, she whispered, her voice a fragile thread. Did they hear? I don't know, he said, looking up as Lyris approached, her spear reforming. But I know I did, and that's a start. Lyris stood over them, her mirror eyes reflecting their broken forms back at them. The human first, she commanded, the spear's tip inches from Merrick's throat. Then the architect. We will purge this sector and start again. The harmony must be preserved. Merrick looked her in the eye, or where he thought her eyes were behind that reflective chrome. Do it, Warden, he said, his voice steady despite everything. But you can't kill the truth. It's already in the stream. You can erase us, but you can't erase what she showed them. You're the one out of sync now. Lyris's hand tightened on the spear. The dark energy hummed, ready to unmake him. But then the chamber changed. The High Wardens who had been standing guard, frozen, watching, didn't move to help Lyris. They stood still, their heads tilted, their obsidian visors fixed on the shattered interface where Seraphine's broadcast had originated. One of them, the one Merrick had shot in the throat, reached up slowly and removed his helmet. The face beneath had the same elegant features as Seraphine, the same impossible bone structure. But his eyes were no longer mirrors. They were deep space, swirling purple and silver, suggesting consciousness rather than programming. And they were weeping, the warden spoke. Not a thought broadcast, a sound, a wet, ragged voice that came from a throat that had forgotten how to make words. I remember, he said. Lyris turned, her armor flashing crimson. What are you doing? Resync your link. That is an order. But it was too late. One by one, the other wardens removed their helmets. One by one, the cold mirror silence of the Covenant was replaced by the sound of 3 billion souls waking from a dream they hadn't known they were trapped in. They weren't synchronized anymore. They were individuals, messy, discordant, terrified, alive. Lyris looked at her soldiers, then back at Merrick and Seraphine. The deletion spear in her hand flickered. Died. She was alone. The High Warden of the Luminous Covenant, architect of perfect harmony, was the only one left singing the old song. And for the first time in her long existence, Merrick saw fear in those mirror eyes. He looked down at Seraphine. She was smiling, a tiny, exhausted smile that told him everything he needed to know. They'd done it. They'd brought the truth to the stars. But as the newly awakened wardens staggered around them, gasping and crying and experiencing emotions for the first time in decades or centuries, Merrick realized the real challenge was only beginning. They'd broken the harmony. Now they had to figure out what to build with the pieces. Looks like you're going to need a bigger medical kit, he muttered, leaning his head against Seraphine's. She let out a soft laugh, the most human sound he'd ever heard her make. Same time tomorrow, Declan? Every day after, he replied. Every day after. External alarms began screaming. The flagship shuddered as detection grids lit up with proximity warnings. Through the chamber's viewports, Merrick could see them arriving, dozens of ships emerging from FTE like sharks drawn to blood in the water. Federation dreadnoughts, Iron Shard interceptors, all converging on a Covenant vessel that had just broadcast a psychic scream loud enough to be heard across 3 star systems. They detected the awakening, and they were coming to claim the prize. The war had found them again. But this time, Merrick thought, looking at the weeping wardens, learning what it meant to feel, at Seraphine barely conscious but smiling, at Lyris standing frozen and powerless. This time, maybe the war would find something it wasn't expecting. Not perfect soldiers, not mindless drones, people. Broken, terrified, newly born people who were just learning how to scream. And scream they would. The screaming didn't stop. It wasn't the sound of weapons or explosions. Not yet. It was worse. 3 billion souls experiencing fear, grief, and joy simultaneously. Their consciousness no longer synchronized by the harmony, but erupting in a psychic flashover that felt like a sun-going supernova inside every living mind aboard the harmony's apex. Declan Ferrick pressed his hands against his ears, but it did nothing. The sound wasn't coming through his ears, it was bypassing them entirely. Flooding directly into his neural pathways through proximity to Seraphine's collapsing broadcast. Around him, high wardens were on their knees, some in fetal positions, hands clawing at their helmets. The ones who hadn't removed them yet, desperate to block input that was coming from inside their own consciousness. Others stared at their hands with expressions of profound horror, as if they just realized they'd been wearing gloves made of their own sins. Declan, Seraphine's voice cut through the cacophony, weak but urgent. She was still slumped against him, her weight real and heavy in a way that God shouldn't be. It is too much. The resonance, it is not a song anymore. It is a scream. He shifted position, trying to ignore the jagged protest of his damaged ribs. His shoulder, the one the Covenant had healed, felt solid, but everything else was breaking down. Blood in his mouth, vision swimming. "Listen to Ma," he said, grabbing her chin and forcing her to focus on his eyes instead of the chaos erupting around them. "I know it's a complete disaster right now. Your people are having the mother of all panic attacks. But if you don't find a way to stabilize a local link, this ship is going to flatline." "I cannot," she wheezed, her tattoos flickering between blue and sickly gray like a failing power grid. "I am one voice among trillions. I broke the glass, Declan. I cannot put it back together." "Then don't put it back," he snapped. "Don't rebuild the cage. Just give them a rhythm. Any rhythm. Something to hold on to so they don't drown." He stood, swaying as artificial gravity fluctuated. The flagship's systems, struggling as crew members across every deck, simultaneously forgot how to do their jobs, how to be synchronized, how to be anything other than terrified individuals. The nearest warden, the one who'd first removed his helmet, the one who'd wept, was shaking violently. His elegant features were contorted, silver blood leaking from a self-inflicted scratch on his cheek where he'd clawed at his own face. "Hey!" Merrick moved toward him, dropped to one knee. "Focus on me." The warden didn't respond. He stared through Merrick at some private horror only he could see. 4 centuries of suppressed memory, flooding back all at once. Every decision made by consensus, every moment of individuality, compressed and archived and forgotten. Merrick didn't have time for gentle bedside manner. He reached out and slapped the warden across the face. The crack echoed through the chamber. The warden's head snapped back. His eyes, those impossible deep space eyes, cleared for a second, focusing on Merrick's face. "Breathe," Merrick commanded, his voice dropping into the calm authority he'd used on 100 battlefields with 100 dying soldiers. "In through the nose, out through the mouth. Count to 4. Do it now or you're going to blow your own neural circuits." The warden stared at him. His mouth worked silently, trying to remember how to form words that weren't thought broadcasts. Then he breathed, a real, ragged human breath. 1, 2, 3, 4. "There you go," Merrick muttered, feeling sweat roll down his neck despite the climate-controlled air. "You're alive. It sucks, doesn't it? Welcome to the club." He turned back to Seraphine. She was watching him with something like wonder in her exhausted eyes. "See," he said, "one at a time. That's the only way this works. We don't save a world, Seraphine. We save the person standing in front of us." She stared at him for a long moment. Then slowly she reached out to the air. Her fingers danced through invisible currents, the ghost ribbons of the shattered data network. She wasn't trying to rebuild the harmony. She was sending out a pulse, a heartbeat. Steady, simple, human. "Just stay steady," she whispered. And this time the thought broadcast wasn't a command from on high. It was a hand held out in darkness, an invitation rather than an order. The screaming began to subside. Not silence, never silence again, but something closer to breathing. 3 billion people learning how to inhale and exhale, and individuals instead of a perfect choir. Merrick spent the next 4 hours being the only sane man in an asylum that spanned 10 kilometers of phased matter hall. He moved from warden to warden, using his last medical supplies and a lot of extremely undiplomatic shouting to keep them from complete catatonia. It was the most exhausting triage of his life, treating a species that had never known a headache, let alone a broken heart. "You're going to be okay," he told a female warden, whose name he didn't know, whose armor had retracted to show skin covered in tattoos that pulsed erratically. "The panic will pass, just keep breathing, in, out. You're not dying, you're being born." "I remember," she gasped, tears like liquid mercury streaming down her face. "I remember my mother. I remember having a mother. Before the harmony, Before I was uploaded, I remember her voice. Good, Merrick said, checking her pulse. Too fast, but steady. Hold on to that. That's yours. No one can take it away now. By the fifth hour, the Harmony's apex was no longer a dead weight drifting through space. The tilt in artificial gravity had leveled out. The light ribbons in the quarters turned from angry red to cautious amber. The bridge crew had found their heartbeat. But the peace didn't last. The proximity sensors didn't chime. They wailed, a sound like 1,000 sirens going off simultaneously. The kind of alarm that meant the definition of proximity had just been violated by something very large and very hostile. Seraphine struggled to her feet, her robes tattered, her face pale. The Federation and the Shard, they are here. Merrick joined her at the massive viewport. His heart sank. Emerging from the violet nebula clouds were 6 human dreadnoughts, angular, brutal ships covered in weapons that had been designed for one purpose: killing things efficiently. Leading them was the Dauntless, its hull still scorched from the Fort Henderson bombardment. Major Vance Hollis's flagship. Behind the human vessels, like a swarm of angry insects, came the Iron Shard interceptors. Dozens of them, their black hulls bristling with railguns and missile pods. They weren't fighting each other. They were moving in a pincer formation. Weapons locked on the Harmony's apex. They saw the pulse, Merrick said, bitter laughter escaping his throat. They saw the glitch in your perfect harmony and decided the buffet was open. Hollis's voice crackled over the ship's communication systems. The Major had hacked into the Covenant's network with the kind of arrogance only humans could manage. This is Major Vance Hollis of the Terran Federation to the unidentified Celestian vessel. You are in violation of sector sovereignty. Your systems are broadcasting illegal neural signatures. Power down your shields and prepare to be boarded for security inspection. Failure to comply will be met with terminal force. He's lying, Merrick said to Seraphine. He doesn't care about sovereignty. He wants your technology, and the Shard wants your blood for whatever the Shard wants blood for. You're the biggest prize in galactic history. Seraphine looked at the wardens slowly standing around her, still fragile, their eyes wide with the newness of fear. They weren't soldiers anymore. They were refugees in their own armor, learning what it meant to be afraid of death. We cannot fight them, she said, her voice trembling. My people, we have forgotten how to hate. We have forgotten how to kill without the consensus telling us it serves the greater harmony. Then don't kill, Merrick said, grabbing his pistol from where it had fallen during the chamber battle. But don't you dare roll over. You taught me that courage is acting when you're terrified, remember? Well, look around. Everyone's terrified. That makes this the perfect time to be brave. He turned to the warden he had slapped, the first one to wake up, to speak with his own voice. The Covenant soldier was standing now, his helmet still in his hands, his posture uncertain. What's your name? Merrick asked. The warden blinked as if the question was in a language he didn't understand. I was High Warden designation KL7392. No, Merrick interrupted. What's your name? The one you had before they turned you into a number. KL stared at him. Then slowly something kindled in those deep space eyes. KL, he said, and the words sounded like a man finding his own heartbeat. Just KL. Good. KL, what do we do when the building's on fire and everyone's panicking? KL looked at the viewport, at the human ships closing in, their weapons charging. I do not know. The Harmony always told us. The Harmony is gone, Merrick said. Now you have to decide. You, individually. So what's it going to be? KL looked at Seraphine, then back at Merrick. His hands tightened on his helmet. We hold the doors, he said quietly. Damn right we do. The primary airlock corridor was a vaulted junction where 4 passages met, the only direct route from the outer hull to the bridge. Merrick knew basic ship architecture. You defend the choke points or you die. He dragged supply crates across the intersection, building a barricade that looked pathetic compared to the forces about to breach the hull, but it was something. It was human. It was making sound in the face of silence. Kyle and 6 other wardens took positions beside him. They'd removed their helmets, revealing faces that ranged from terrified to grimly determined. None of them held weapons. They'd literally forgotten how. When they come through, Merrick said, checking his pistol charge. 12 shots left, no spare cells. I need you to stay behind cover. They'll have rifles, grenades, probably shaped charges. Don't try to be heroes, just Declan. Kale's voice was soft. We have been dead for 40 decades. It is time we learned how to bleed. Before Merrick could respond, the airlock at the corridor's end hissed. A thermal breacher began eating through the seals, spitting sparks into the darkness. Merrick crouched behind his makeshift barricade, pistol gripped in both hands to stop the shaking. He was terrified. His hands were trembling so badly he could barely aim. But he'd been terrified at Meridian too. Had stayed anyway. Had saved 43 lives while his hands shook and his heart tried to hammer through his ribs. Fear wasn't the absence of courage. It was the price of it. The airlock blew inward with a concussive blast that made his ears ring. Through the smoke and sparks, he saw the first figures in Federation combat gear. Black ceramic armor, assault rifles, moving with lethal precision. Sergeant Thaddeus Crane. Merrick recognized the gait, the build. They'd served together on 3 deployments before Meridian. Merrick, Crane's voice boomed through external speakers. Stand down. You're protecting an enemy combatant. This is your last chance to surrender. Merrick didn't answer. Just waited until Crane stepped past the threshold into the kill zone. Then he fired. The bolt caught Crane in the thigh, the joint in his armor where kinetic shielding was weakest. The sergeant went down with a scream, clutching his leg. The other soldiers immediately opened fire. High-velocity rounds tore through Merrick's barricade, shredding foam packing and scattering metal fragments. He stayed low, his breath coming in short gasps. This was it. The last stand of the disgraced medic who couldn't follow orders. But then Kyle stood up. "Kyle, get down," Merrick shouted. The warden didn't listen. He stepped out from behind cover, his arms spread wide, palms forward. Unarmed, unarmored, his phase matter suit had retracted, leaving him in simple robes. "I am Kyle," he said, his voice carrying across the corridor. "I am not a designation, I am not a weapon. I am a person, and I will not let you harm the woman who taught me to remember." The Federation soldiers stared at him. For a moment, the gunfire stopped. Pure human confusion at the sight of a gold-armored alien walking toward them with his hands out, like he was asking for a hug. "Fire!" someone yelled. Not Crane, someone else, panicking. "It's a neural attack! Don't let it touch you!" The rifles opened up again. Merrick watched in horror as rounds punched into Kale's chest. The phase matter robes tried to harden, tried to protect, but they weren't designed for this. Silver blood sprayed across white walls. Kale stumbled, but he didn't fall. He kept walking. Behind him, the other 6 wardens stepped out. One by one, all unarmed, all walking toward the soldiers with their hands out. "We have been dead," they said in unison, and it wasn't a thought broadcast, but their own voices, ragged and real. "Time we learned to bleed." The Federation soldiers didn't know what to do. Their training covered enemy combatants, covered hostile aliens, covered threats that needed to be neutralized. It didn't cover beings who walked into gunfire without fighting back, who absorbed bullets and kept coming, not with weapons, but with open hands. When Kyle reached the first soldier, he didn't strike. He touched the man's helmet. The effect was instantaneous. The soldier's rifle clattered to the floor. He began shaking, his head tilting back, hands clutching at his temples as 400 years of archived memory flooded his consciousness through skin-to-skin contact. He felt everything. Meridian Station, the 43 civilians, the 8-year-old girl named Rowan who died drawing horses. Every order he'd followed that traded human lives for tactical advantage. He felt the weight of being individual, of being responsible, and he collapsed, sobbing. One by one, the other wardens reached the soldiers. One by one, combat-hardened Federation troops dropped their weapons and fell to their knees, weeping as empathy hit them like a freight train. The corridor filled with the sound of crying, human and covenant mingled together. The beautiful, awful sound of people learning they'd been wrong. But the cost was brutal. Kale was bleeding from a dozen wounds, his robe soaked silver. The other wardens were in similar states, stumbling, gasping, their bodies taking damage they'd never experienced in centuries of synchronized existence. Merrick scrambled over to Kale as the warden finally collapsed. He caught him before he hit the floor, his hands immediately going to the worst wounds, chest punctures, arterial damage. Kale, stay with me." The warden's eyes, those impossible deep space eyes, focused on Merrick's face. Did we, did we win? You didn't win, Merrick said, pulling sterilization gel from his kit with shaking hands. You began, and that's enough. Now shut up and let me work. But even as he tried to seal the wounds, he knew it wasn't enough. He was one medic with a nearly empty kit, facing injuries he barely understood in biology he'd been improvising since day one. He needed help. As if summoning her with thought, Seraphine appeared at the corridor entrance. She looked like a ghost, her light almost gone, her robes stained with the silver blood of her people, her tattoos flickering weakly. But she was standing. Declan, she said, her voice barely audible over the sobbing. The flagship is dying. Combined bombardment from both fleets. The hull cannot hold much longer. Merrick looked at the unconscious soldiers, at the wounded wardens, at Kyle bleeding out in his arms. We have to go, Seraphine continued. The secondary lifeboats are still functional. If we move now, we can reach them before the core detonates. What about them? Merrick gestured at the Federation troops on the floor. Seraphine looked at the soldiers, the ones who'd come to kill her, to claim her as salvage. The ones who were now crying like children who'd just learned the truth about where babies come from. For a moment, he saw the High Architect flicker in her eyes, the being who calculated acceptable losses. Then it vanished. They are patients, she said, echoing his words from the bunker. We take them all. The next hour was a desperate scramble through a ship that was actively dying. The Harmony's apex groaned with structural damage as Federation and Shard weapons chewed through hull plating that had withstood 4 centuries without a scratch. They hauled soldiers, dragged wounded wardens, grabbed whatever medical supplies hadn't been destroyed. 21 souls total. 7 wardens, 11 humans, Seraphine, and Merrick. All crammed into a lifeboat designed for maybe 15, all bleeding or weeping or both. Merrick was the last one aboard. He looked back at the flagship one final time as the hatch sealed, saw the golden hull skeleton being torn apart by vacuum and violence, saw the beautiful script-covered walls dissolving into space dust, the end of an empire rendered in fire and silence. Then the lifeboat detached, its small engines screaming as it spiraled away from the blast radius. Behind them, the Harmony's apex exploded. Not a Hollywood fireball. Phase matter didn't burn, it just stopped being matter. The flagship collapsed into a singularity for half a second, then erupted outward in a shockwave of white light that painted the entire nebula in colors that had no names. As the lifeboat's systems powered up, a priority transmission crackled through the comm, scrambled Federation channels. But Merrick recognized the voice. Major Hollis, still alive, still hunting. I will find you, Merrick, the transmission hissed through static. You and your alien queen, the Federation has a long memory. Merrick looked at Seraphine. She met his eyes, her tattoos pulsing steady blue. Let him look, she said quietly. The galaxy is vast, and we have work to do. Merrick switched off the comm. The threat would always be there, hanging over them like a sword. But for now, they had 3 weeks and 21 lives to keep breathing. That was enough. Merrick leaned his head back against the cold metal wall. His shoulder was burning again. The Covenant's perfect healing, failing under stress. He was pretty sure he had a concussion. But for the first time in 11 years, he didn't feel like a ghost. He looked around the lifeboat. Saw Corporal Jax Brennan, a cleaner who'd killed at least a dozen civilians at Fort Henderson, holding the hand of the warden who'd touched him, both of them shaking. Saw Sergeant Crane, his leg crudely bandaged, teaching another warden how to breathe through a panic attack. Saw Seraphine, slumped against the far wall, her eyes closed but her chest rising and falling steadily. Alive. The lifeboat's navigation computer chimed softly. Destination locked. Vale's Edge, a neutral moon on the fringes of known space. Smuggler Haven, refugee waypoint. The kind of place where no one asked questions as long as you paid your dock fees. 3 weeks away at sublight speeds. 3 weeks to figure out what came next. The Harmony's apex died, but the awakening didn't. Across 17 star systems, 3 billion souls felt the connection sever. Not into silence, but into cacophony. Thorn Sector citizens woke in their homes, their ships, their workstations, suddenly individual for the first time in centuries. Some would adapt, some would break. Most would stumble forward, learning to be people instead of notes in a perfect song. And High Warden Lyris, last defender of the old Harmony, was pulled from the wreckage by her own subordinates, wardens who no longer followed her orders, but remembered her name. She would stand trial, not for treason against the Covenant, for murder, for silencing the Valyrians, for 400 years of erasure disguised as peace. The Thorn Sector's first act as individuals was justice. Messy, loud, imperfect, human. Week 1 was survival. Merrick performed triage in a space barely large enough to turn around in. He treated Kyl's chest wounds with the last of his sterilization gel, jury-rigged a flux suture to work on Covenant physiology, and prayed to gods he didn't believe in that silver blood clotted the same way red blood did. It didn't, but close enough. Jax Brennan asked him, voice raw from crying, "Why did she show us? Why not just kill us and be done with it?" "Because she wanted you to hear the truth," Merrick said, checking the corporal's vitals. Elevated heart rate, PTSD symptoms already manifesting. "She wanted you to know that the people you were shooting at have names, that they have heartbeats." "It's a hell of a thing, Doc," Brennan whispered, staring at his hands. "Knowing you've been the villain for 11 years. "We've all been villains," Merrick replied quietly. "The trick is deciding to stop." Week 2 was adjustment. The soldiers woke from the neural surge one by one, their minds flooded with archived memories that weren't their own, but felt more real than their own service records. They experienced psychic whiplash, the disconnect between who they'd thought they were and who they actually were. Kale taught Brennan how to meditate, how to process trauma without the Harmony's guidance. It was awkward, a 400-year-old alien teaching a 35-year-old human how to handle PTSD, but it worked. Seraphine learned basic field medicine from Merrick. She was a terrible student, kept trying to treat injuries with harmonic resonance instead of bandages. But she tried. And watching her burn a nutrient bar while attempting to cook it provided the first genuine laughter the lifeboat had heard. Crane took over supply management, rationing their food and water with military precision. The wardens, used to not eating at all, gave their portions to the humans without complaint. Week 3 was destination. They reached Vale's Edge on day 21, a dust-colored moon hanging in space like a forgotten marble. Its surface was dotted with dim lights, scrapyard districts, and hab modules that had been welded together by people who'd run out of options. It wasn't paradise. It was barely civilization, but it was off every tactical grid in the sector, and that made it perfect. The lifeboat touched down in a scrapyard district on the moon's lower hemisphere, a warren of shipping containers and salvaged hull plating that had been repurposed into living spaces. Merrick was the first one out, his boots crunching on regolith that smelled of rust and recycled air. He looked up at the sky, violet nebula glow painting everything in shades of purple and gold. "Home sweet home," he muttered. Crane came up beside him. "We're AWOL, Doc. The Federation will execute us if they find us." Kale stepped off the ramp next, his wounds mostly healed, but leaving scars, silver lines across his chest that would never fade. "The Covenant will call us corrupted. We have no home." Seraphine was last. She'd traded her gold and silver robes for a simple gray mechanic's jumpsuit someone had found in the lifeboat's emergency locker. Her hair was tied back in a practical knot. She looked nothing like a high architect. She looked human. "Then we make one," Merrick said, looking at the scrapyard around them. "Right here." It took 3 days to find the shipping container. Standard 40-footer, rust red with holes in the hull they had to patch with salvaged plating. But it had space, and it had access to the moon's power grid. Merrick set up 2 examination tables he'd salvaged from a crashed freighter. Crates of medical supplies he'd traded his Federation pistol for. He didn't need the gun anymore. A hand-painted sign that Brennan made. "Vale's Edge Free Clinic, all species welcome." The first patient was a 5-year-old human girl named Ivy, refugee from a Shard border raid, scraped knee from climbing on hull plating she wasn't supposed to climb on. Merrick knelt down to her level, his professional smile firmly in place. "Let's see what we've got here, kiddo." Ivy stared at him with wide brown eyes. "Are you a real doctor?" "Real enough," Merrick said, applying sterilization gel that made her giggle. "Now, you need to stay off the scrap heaps for at least 2 days or I'm going to tell your mom you're auditioning to be a scrap bot." Ivy laughed, bright and clear, the kind of sound that didn't belong in a war zone but existed anyway because children were resilient like that. She hopped off the table and ran toward the door where her mother waited. They disappeared into the corridor, their voices joining the chaos of the station. Merrick sat back on his stool, wiping his hands on a relatively clean rag. His shoulder didn't hurt anymore. His ribs were healed. He felt solid, real. Not a ghost, a man. Seraphine entered the clinic a few minutes later, carrying a crate of neural link components she'd been refurbishing for the station's communication hub. She wasn't an architect of empires anymore. She was an architect of connections, helping refugees stay in touch with families scattered across the sector. Shipment from the orbital docks arrived, she said, her voice no longer resonating with the harmonics, just warm, grounded, hers. 3 crates of antibiotic cultures and 5 liters of saline. Good, Merrick said, standing to help her with the crate. We're low. I've got 3 more cases of lung infections from the lower levels. The air filters are failing again. Seraphine set the crate down and looked at him. Her eyes, still those impossible nebulae, but softer now, tracked the scar on his shoulder with lingering fondness. You have been working for 14 hours, Declan. You should rest. I'll rest when the chaos stops, he said, giving her a tired grin, which on this rock means never. She laughed. The sound still made his heart do something complicated. She walked to the window, a small reinforced panel that looked out over the scrapyard. Ships taking off and landing, lights flickering in the distance. The violet nebula painting the horizon in shades of cosmic fire. Merrick joined her. They stood in silence, watching the life of the station unfold beneath them. It's funny, he said after a while. I spent 11 years in the Federation thinking I knew what struggle looked like. Thought it was all about the big battles, the orbital strikes, the tactical evacuations. He shook his head. But now I think the real struggle is this, keeping the filters running, patching scraped knees, making sure people have enough to eat. It's the small things, the things that don't make it into the history files. Seraphine turned to him, her tattoos glowing soft, contented blue. You taught me that, Declan. You taught me that 1 trillion lives are made of single heartbeats, that you cannot hear the music if you ignore the notes. He looked at his hands, scarred, stained with the dust of Vale's edge. Steady. He'd changed. The disgraced medic who'd been waiting for a bullet to find him was gone. In his place was someone who'd found a reason to keep breathing. I remember the silence of the harmony's apex, he said quietly. How perfect it felt. But I'd take this chaos any day. The screams, the laughter, the smell of grease and burning nutrient bars. I'd take all of it over that silence. Seraphine reached out and took his hand. Her skin was warm, real, human in all the ways that mattered. We are no longer architects or soldiers, Declan, she said. We are just here. Yeah, he replied, squeezing her fingers. Just here. He thought about the journey they'd taken, from the ash of Fort Henderson to the starlight of a scrapyard moon, from a bunker where they'd hidden from armies to a clinic where they healed 1 patient at a time. Courage wasn't the moment you chose to die. It was choosing to live day after day in a world that wasn't perfect. It was looking at a queen and seeing a woman who needed a hand. He was Declan Merrick, 41 years old, former combat medic, current operator of a free clinic on a moon that most maps didn't bother including. And for the first time in his life, he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The door chimed, another patient. Cale entered, supporting Brennan, who was limping. Old wound acting up, probably needed the bandage changed. Behind them came Crane with supply manifests and 2 more wardens whose names Merrick was still learning. Doc, Brennan said, his voice sheepish. I think I pulled something. Get on the table, Merrick said, already moving toward his kit. Seraphine, I need the sterilization gel. Cale, grab those fresh bandages from the top crate. They moved together. Not synchronized, nothing like the harmony's perfect coordination, but functional, real. A group of broken people who'd decided that fixing each other was better than staying broken alone. As Merrick worked, he caught Seraphine's eye across the clinic. She smiled at him, not the cold calculation of an architect, but the genuine warmth of a partner. Outside, the binary stars of Vale's Edge were setting, painting the scrapyard in shades of orange and violet. The chaos of the station continued, ships landing, people arguing, children laughing, the eternal grinding of machinery that kept civilization running on the edge of nowhere. It wasn't harmony, it was imperfection, Beautiful, messy, impossible imperfection, and Merrick wouldn't trade it for anything. "Same time tomorrow?" Seraphine asked, finishing with the bandage on Brennan's leg. Merrick looked around the clinic, at the people who'd become his family, at the work that would never be finished, at the sound that would never stop. "Every day after," he said, "every day after." The moon turned beneath them. The galaxy turned above them. And in a small red shipping container in a forgotten scrapyard, a disgraced medic and a fallen queen kept making sound. Because silence, they had learned, was just another word for death, and they had chosen to live. Seraphine stood at the clinic window long after everyone had left, watching the violet nebula paint the horizon. Her tattoos pulsed softly, no longer the perfect synchronized blue of the Covenant, but something uniquely hers. Silver mixed with blue, with flecks of gold that appeared when she thought about Declan. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the small metal tag. Rowan, 8 years old, liked to draw horses. On the windowsill beside it, she placed a new drawing. Ivy's work, crayon on salvaged paper, a crude but enthusiastic rendering of a horse running through stars. 2 children, one dead, one alive. The cost of silence and the price of truth. Seraphine had been an architect for 400 years. She designed worlds, calculated the deaths of species, maintained the perfect harmony of 3 billion souls. But standing in this clinic, looking at a child's drawing next to a dead girl's ID tag, she realized she'd never actually built anything until now. The harmony had been beautiful, perfect, a song that played for 40 decades without a single wrong note. But it had been a lie. Real music, the kind that mattered, the kind that changed you, required imperfection, required individuals brave enough to hit the wrong notes and keep playing anyway. She looked at Ivy's drawing and remembered the Valerians, poets who sang in frequencies that made stars weep. She'd silenced them for being too beautiful, for threatening the Covenant's perfect order. Now she understood their lesson. Beauty required imperfection. Songs required wrong notes. And healing required the courage to be broken first. She heard footsteps behind her. Declan returning with coffee he'd traded from a vendor 2 levels down. It tasted like recycled engine coolant, but it was hot and it was real. "Thought you might still be here," he said, handing her a cup. "I was remembering," as she replied, taking the coffee and grimacing at the taste. "Remembering what it felt like before, the silence." "Any regrets?" She looked at him, at this human who'd saved her life when logic said he should have walked away. Who'd taught her that one messy, finite, impossible life was worth more than 1,000,000,000,000 perfect echoes? "None," she said, "not one." They stood together, drinking terrible coffee, watching the moon turn beneath artificial stars. 2 broken things that had learned how to be whole. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, the galaxy continued its violent dance. The Federation and the Shards still fought their endless war. The Covenant's remaining sectors still clung to their harmony, terrified of the imperfections spreading through the network. But here, in a shipping container clinic on a moon called Vale's Edge, a disgraced doctor and a fallen architect had started something new. Not harmony, not silence, just people, helping people, one heartbeat at a time. Seraphine smiled, set down her coffee, and turned back to the clinic. There was work to do. There was always work to do. And for the first time in 400 years, she was grateful for it. "Every day after, Declan," she said softly. He smiled. "Every day after, Seraphine." The door opened. Another patient, another heartbeat and the sound of being alive. And they got back to work.